Alrighty. Great games at your table. This is Jonathan Alvin. This is Making Believe. Tonight we're going to be talking about a subject that's near and dear to my heart, and that is that I've been running role-playing games for nigh unto 50 years. I started playing in 1974-ish, and I've been running non-stop games for all of the time since then. But recently I made the decision to not run Dungeons and Dragons games anymore, and although I'm broadcasting this in the Dungeons and Dragons channel, I'm doing so because I believe the information is kind of important for players who are still in the Dungeons and Dragons elements to understand why somebody with 50 years of experience would abandon a property that has such a long legacy as to be the primary source for the role-playing that I appreciate and crave. So we're going to be talking about the particulars of why I no longer run Dungeons and Dragons games, and we'll go into the particulars of them. And this is part of the Nycos Launchpad, a new program I've developed that will assist you in creating for yourself a dynamic and creative and imaginative life in whatever framework that you're currently in. And so, in particular, Dungeons and Dragons is a role-play game, as many of you know, has a fairly long and rather checkered past in terms of its popular perception. Early on, it was seen by many to be a bellwether of a change in the way people interacted. For those of us that were early adopters, if you will, the role-playing game environment was seen as a kind of a haven for the elite. That people who played were mostly considered to be, genius level or very highly and motivated in terms of their education and promotion and all of that. And over time, that gave way to more populist views to the point where it became negative. But one of the reasons why I have moved away from running Dungeons and Dragons games is actually directly related to the property itself. And that is, I don't adhere any longer to the core precepts of the lore. The story that was told to those of us who were players early on. Hey, just a second. We got a message coming in here. Uno momento, por favor. Let me go see who this is. Alrighty. Oops, wrong one. Try that a different way. Oop. Okay, there we go. Strigley, hello. D&D is the only tabletop that is good. I happen to challenge that, as you know, Strigley. I'm so glad to see you with us. And I apologize if I am distorting. Part of it may be I'm still dealing with my bells, but if I'm continuing, it may also be to do with the microphone. I've been having fun issues with it most of the last couple of days. So, okay, let me go see if I can fix that. Alrighty, so we'll try something else here. Testing. Oh, no wonder. Yep. Hang on a second. That should probably fix it a little bit. If that does, let me know. I made a change to the settings, so that should theoretically help. Is that better? Does the microphone seem better now? me know. In the meantime, yeah. So one of the reasons why I don't run Dungeons and Dragons games any longer is the very lore. Many of the details that were created in the original defining characteristics of the game were kind of soft pedaled. In other words, you had spells that had character names within them, like Morden Canaan's Hound or Big B's Hand. And these names didn't have a meaning associated with them because they were being published for general consumption. And at the time, the focus was on storytellers and game masters using the Dungeons and Dragons mechanism for their own story building. And therefore, they de-emphasized those particular non-player personalities. And did that fix the microphone strictly? Am I sounding better now? Let me know. And I'm trying to get everything organized on this side. Bit too quiet, if anything. All right. So I'll sit a little bit closer and try to turn it up a bit further. I'm eventually going to get this down. One of these days I'll be a professional. So that should be a little bit better. I'm just making sure I don't go into the muffle area anymore. Don't want it to distort any longer. I think that should fix it. Alrighty, so double checking. Well, it just barely pops over the edge, so. Okie dokie. Alrighty. That seems to be better. Do that now. Well, you can always turn your local volume down too, so I don't want to take it too low because I don't want the sound quality to drop out for those. And they may be just being, you try to be belligerent too, we're going too low, too high, too low, too high. That would be pretty funny. And that would not be, I wouldn't put it past you. But, so the lore changes, and the lore itself has never been that good. And additionally, if you look at it from a player buy-in, the most recent lore is far, far too wide. There are too many things you have to have in order to maintain a normal connection with the game. You have to own a half dozen realms and twice that in modules and supplements. It just gets to be too much. It's not. Now, I say that in spite of the fact that the Nycos storyline is a 6.5-year story arc that repeats over and again, and each time it's slightly different. So, yeah, there's 10,600 years of played game time that encompasses. And so at one level, it sounds like I'm talking out of one side of my face and not the other. But the reality is that a story that has depth and richness you can dig into more than once. But if you are instead looking at it from the standpoint of what a player would have to do to become a part of the environment, NycosRPG doesn't require any of the previous iterations to be a part of the story for you to build your own lore in your own direction. And so lore is one of the primary reasons why I left, because there isn't anything substantive that isn't already published. it's just all rehash and rewrite and rehash and rewrite, and that's just not something that I'm wanting to pursue. And so the lore has driven me away. The second thing, and pardon me for my alliteration or my poetry here, another thing that has locked me out of Dungeons and Dragons is the bore. And this has more to do with the mechanics than anything else. The tit for tat, roll an initiative die roll once and just go in turn sequence is such a bore. It's just difficult to even want to play. It's unfortunate that a mechanism that used to be quite dynamic with weapon speed factor and characters dex modifiers and such being played into initiative roll turn over turn, so there was always something shifting and changing in the sequence to keep your players on their toes. The new version, the current version, is just a snooze fest, and it doesn't do anything to it doesn't do anything to promote additional player excitement. So it just doesn't feel exciting or cinematic or thrilling in any way. And it just fundamentally is a what I've called before a bam bam situation where I hit, you hit, I hit, you hit, and as long as we have a big pile of hit points, it doesn't much matter. The next thing that's really kind of bugged me is a developing trend to keep score. And I don't mean in terms of, tracking how many kills you get or how many hit points you've gathered or whatever. It's the actual concept that players have that when they build their character in game, that they're somehow going to be able to build an optimal build with a certain number of skill points and a certain number of proficiencies and a certain number of actions, etc., 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 that they make it untenable to keep to the story as the storyteller intended. Instead, they are constantly finding ways to measure their own success or failure in terms of the points they've earned in game or the number of advances they've made down the track and how many proficiencies and skill modifiers and such that they've developed. And it just becomes such a, to me, again, back to the boredom. It's a counting coup process that really is undermining of the value of being part of the story. And keeping score is also a mechanism that is counterproductive to roleplay anyway, because you are measuring your position or value in terms of what you've done instead of being who you are. The next position that I find is that Dungeons and Dragons has changed its focus. It's no longer focused on the story and the player development and the advancement of a character down a predicted arc or completion of missions or any of that. Instead, the focus is now shifted to mommy, see what I can do. Mommy, watch me. And that kind of pick me mode of graduating or advancing within a roleplay game is, to me, it's counterproductive and uninteresting. The players each, of course, can be interested in their own. Ooga booga. Nice to have you with us. Negamangle. I think I'm saying that right. Negamangle. Ooga booga. Glad to have you with us. So focus shifting is a. Oh, did I say it wrong? So, anyway, the change in focus of roleplay gamers has kind of driven me away from the Dungeons and Dragons core, because the way players perceive of the game, they actually are disregarding the storyteller fundamentally altogether. They only perceive of them in terms of being a scorekeeper and a person who keeps track of the points and who keeps track of the awards and kind of gives them their benefits and their promotions, regardless of their elemental following of the story and such. And I just, it's off-putting. It's not that the story of the game has changed that much, although it has. More importantly, it's that the demands put on the storytellers by the game players has indeed changed a lot. And I no longer feel like I fit what a player is going to look for in terms of Dungeons and Dragons, because I'm not going to match that checklist, so to speak. I also think that this has led to a kind of a rift in the audience. There are those who hold to an older ideal, probably those of us that are older, that are wanting to pursue a story or have the players work towards the success of a mission or whatever. But there's been pretty much a player split, almost right down the middle, between those who are wish fulfillment and those that are story accomplishment. And the two have a real hard time working together if they don't choose one course or the other that makes sense to them. Oh, okay. I didn't recognize the name. That's all. How would I possibly? I suppose Ooga Booga should have given away. I don't know. I'm glad to see you on board, Vox. Yeah, you can relate to some of the stuff I'm saying here as your own player progression, your own experience in roleplay games has changed a lot since you started playing with us. But this audience rift couldn't be made more clear than, hey, Burning Emerald. Oh, thank you. I don't even see the ad notifications again, so I'll have to get that fixed. Oh, no. 6 ads. Yikes. Wow, I'm sorry about that. It should be quite some time before we get another hit of them then, because I think it's like 20 minutes apart or whatever. So I'll endeavor to get my screen up so I can actually see the commercials. Oh, there we go. Alrighty, so we were talking about audience rift, and there's been a radical divide right down the middle on Dungeons and Dragons player base, in my estimation. I think it had something to do with the development of shows like Critical Role, because it gave players a different perspective on what they thought they might be able to get from their games, but it also created almost a false front for storytellers to think that they could just phone it in and get the same kind of responses. And this breakdown put us in a situation where players would come to my game either, number one, expecting myself to be as overtly dramatic as Mercer or whatever their storytellers are, or they wanted to have the kind of free reign that, of course, a show like that can provide, since it's all kind of pre-coordinated. And this rift has led to players that will come to the game and have an altered expectation of what they should be getting from my game. And they are either underwhelmed or overwhelmed, depending on which perspective they're coming from. Some are, blown away and surprised by how detailed my games are, and others are confused and concerned about how flat my games are because I don't use visuals very much anymore. Instead, I operate in theater of the mind. Yep, I'm with you about the commercials. That's definitely not cool. But, they do what they got to do, so to speak. Now, in addition to these issues, getting back to my page here, we can look at the fact that there's a power drift. And this has been going on for probably 20, 25 years. And that is not what you think it is. I'm not speaking of the power drift between game masters and players, which I could, I suppose, pontificate on for quite some period of time. Yes, you did. You definitely came from the criticals at Roadside, and you did adapt fairly well. I think that you also gave me a lot more slack than perhaps some other of the Mercer fans might have. Maybe it's because of my age, but I definitely feel like I was able to give you a little bit more of what you were looking for, knowing that's what the audience target focus was. But this power drift that I'm talking about here, this gradual shift that's still going on today, is a move from being a game master service organization providing the tools to make games dynamic, exciting, and fun, to being a intellectual property generator that is trying to capitalize on a license and prevent other manufacturers from taking advantage of that mechanism. The problem with this power drift is that it means less and less control for the storyteller and game master, and more control for the publisher and distributor. And the real challenge to that is that it squelches creativity. The idea of power sliding into the hands of a manufacturer kind of sounds all right. You'd think, well, the manufacturer should have some say about their property or whatever. But the reality is that when you focus on that to the exclusion of support to the game masters who actually drive the attention to your game, it's counterproductive. Let's see, what do we got next? Of course, the next phase of their plan is to drive up the cost, and this was accomplished quite some time ago. I remember there was a period of time where the books were pretty static at $20, $25 for a volume, and then seemingly overnight that jumped to $50 to $75 a book. And now it's gotten even crazier because they mandate that you actually get the online version of the game as well, because their secret plan is to undermine the cost of production and reduce the number of books that are sold, because they want there to be fewer storytellers with agency, game masters who have the 411 how to tell a story. And they want to be able to fundamentally even remove game masters in the long term. There was some recent scuttlebutt about Wizards of the Coast openly entertaining artificial intelligence in the game master space. And that's kind of terrifying to think that the person who is relating your story or adjudicating the result of your player actions could actually be a robotic voice who really doesn't even comprehend what is being said or how it's being interacted. And that's kind of dangerous. So I think the material cost here is actually threefold. You've got the increased cost of the paper products and the electronics not helping that. And then you've got the increased cost by having so many new titles that the storyteller game master has to include to be comprehensive. And then finally, the cost of the game master resource as we slowly drive the storyteller out of the scene, out of the action. And of course, this is a great danger that we really don't want to try to face. Now, beyond all of these, another entire category is the fact that the very message of Dungeons and Dragons has become lost. Yes, yes. I get what you're saying, Vox. But here's the thing to remember: if we eliminate the storyteller and we put the heart of an AI in there, then we have the potential, maybe not in the short term, but in the long term, to eliminate the very ethical and moral implications of subjectively determining the success or failure of roleplay. The mechanism of Dungeons and Dragons that awards advancement in levels shouldn't be associated only with a point system, because if you want that, go play a video game. Instead, there should be some way to keep the measurable value of relative role play and dynamic storytelling in the game, because otherwise it's not that game. It's now instead a video game with colorful narrative, I suppose. I would argue that's only true when there are actual other players at the table. If you're just saying me that role play with an AI is totally possible right now, I would disagree with you, because it's not role play if you're actually interacting with a machine that does not have a comprehension of what they're doing, because it is mind versus mind, and an AI is not a mind. It's a routine, an algorithm, a program. It's a mechanism. It's not. There's no way to be a role player who is playing in a game that is full of only AIs. He's just not. Okay, and now let me stop you for a second there. When you speak of the NPC side, if you are speaking of NPCs as AIs, you're missing the point. My point is that even in a game where I'm the game master and you're running into NPCs that I'm developing, a good game master, a good storyteller, has entire personalities behind those NPCs when they are essential. If they're not essential, then it's window dressing, and yes, you could have a little word bubble and a question mark and all of that. Yeah, I know that's the tripe and control, but those are not people. And I would argue that the NPCs in a game like my sessions and many other game masters, they are people. The very concept of what an NPC is broken when you get to video games, because a non-player character is not really even a non-player character. It's not a character. It's a roadblock. It's a speed bump. It's a obstacle to be overcome. It's not a persona. And that's why I've kind of shied away from the Dungeons and Dragons model of using the term non-player character. I almost always now refer to a recurring persona, or a story-based persona, or a window dressing, or nude. No, I get that. And I don't mean to be offensive, Vox. What I'm referring to is that when you say that your interaction with an NPC that is AI is roleplay, I would argue with you that it's not. You're perceiving it that way because you don't have the capacity to engage with a real storyteller in a video game. You're having to settle for inferior product, and that's really one of the reasons why I don't run Dungeons and Dragons games, because I can tell you that the interaction you would have with any NPC, any non-player persona, NPP, whatever you want to call it, in the world of Nycos is going to be so much more rich, deep, and meaningful than anything that you run into on a computer game. And I challenge you openly on that. Come and play. And then you have played in every session, so you know that the NPCs are fundamentally living, breathing beings in terms of their response and their reaction to what players do. So I get that you're coming from a situation saying the video. Thanks, Trig, exactly. So I get that, but the message here that I'm talking about is that there is a message lost in roleplay. And I think it really goes back to the way a persona or a character is built. For those of you that aren't aware of it, when Dungeons and Dragons started out originally, and all the way through Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, you would roll a character up by rolling the set style and number of dice a certain number of times, placing them in the specific order of the character sheet, and then determining which class, race, species those numbers would most represent, and then play that role. You were learning how to play a role. And later on, in 3rd edition and even further into the more modern era, the development of persona became a matter of wish fulfillment, that you would actually choose what you were trying to create. Then you'd use a dice mechanism. Give you your point buy times 3. Well, I would argue that point buy is again focusing the attention on the end game of the player's perspective and undermining the entire perspective of the storyteller, because you're losing the message of the game. If you're trying to play a role, but you're only playing the one you want to play, then aren't you really just playing yourself? And that's okay. Don't get me wrong. It's perfectly viable as a method for role playing, but it's not the same as what Dungeons and Dragons originally was. The message that they originally started with has essentially stopped. You don't agree? Oh, I don't know if you're disagreeing with me or disagreeing with the point buy, but the idea of playing a persona. I can give you some examples from our most recent game. I have several players who want. Okay, that's fair. That's fair. But you and I've also talked about sometimes when you're looking at your NPCs, they are cookie cutter, and you're not giving them their due or their personality. So when we're talking about the message here of the game has changed, we're talking about the fact that the essence of what the game mechanic is for has adapted and become something other than what it was, to the point where it is no longer something that I can actively support, because it's not making players better role players. It's making players more self-indulgent in a lot of ways. And the self-indulgent aspect of the message can be overcome simply by reinstating the ideas. You build a persona and then you build the character. So the idea of building character literally is that you're working on the inwards of the persona to have it accomplish what you want to accomplish. All right, this is a situation also they feel that Dungeons and Dragons has kind of shot themselves in the foot, because they have been on a growth curve that was staggeringly positive since 5th edition launched up until and not excluding the last year and a half. And that's because they had the advantage of being the big dog in the neighborhood, and they were in such a creative space that they could have dominated for the foreseeable future the game's environment if they had rededicated their focus to supporting the creative storyteller and kind of stepping out of the way of intellectual property and instead promote the engine and the mechanism. And I think they're leaving money on the table by that. And I guess I'd say fortunately, because NycosRPG is exactly positioned to take advantage of that, because we have the open engine mechanism so that there are no longer any needs for the players to be bound to what the GM's description is for their own advancement. Now, Advantage 2 was tossed away when they began to suggest that the new iteration of Dungeons and Dragons was going to be electronics on its own. I don't suppose I'm meaning in reference to whether or not electronics is the way to go, because I even admit I've got a large portion of Nycos that is now online and accessible that way, which is arguably a whole lot more useful for players because they can all get to it from their own places of dwelling and their own equipment. So I really can't complain about that. But what I can complain about is that they have thrown away the opportunities to support the IP, and arguably would have kept me on the reservation longer, so to speak, would have had me continue to promote if they were willing to recognize the value of storytellers like myself and see the power and the benefit of independent stories instead of wanting to cookie cutter everyone into the same model. Having said that, I do have, let's see, what have I got left? Oh, yeah. The biggest problem that I have with Dungeons and Dragons is the intentional dearth of imagination. They intentionally leave a void in game master creativity by flat out telling players and game masters what things should look like, when things should happen, what resources should be used, and what outcomes that should be expected. This killing off of creativity it's downright evil in my way of thinking. A story that requires me to hold to lore that is drawn by a map by somebody who drew 6 months ago in another place with a different storyline is problematic. It doesn't let me, for example, in the Adventure League, if you were going to play a module in that, you had to play the most recent one that they had released because that was what was happening this season and we're lockstep with everyone else. And I think that takes away a lot from the game master field and makes it difficult to want to continue if you're not having any agency. The player revolt that happened under 3rd edition has gone on for quite some time, and it seems like it may not end at any time in the future. But the fundamental reality of that is that the players that are coming into the game now are being indoctrinated and guided to see this as the only way of playing roleplay games, and therefore it's intentionally killing off the possibility of an imaginative new format. And that's kind of sad. So these are the reasons why I don't play Dungeons and Dragons anymore. The story has become flat and limiting. The players have begun to keep score and therefore have a challenge whenever you introduce a new monster or a new concept that they haven't engaged because they don't know how to deal with it, and it causes frustration. The players themselves have begun to drift and to adjust the way they react to one another to the point where it's hard to find a game you can actually run smoothly. You have the power drift of each iteration and each game master pushing back on the power of the story and the game design folk trying to capture that. You have the material cost of increasing number of volumes of books you have to have, and the amount of detail you have to own in terms of being able to keep track of what's going on within the game. It's becoming untenable. They've lost the message. They're no longer carrying forth the idea of players playing characters, but instead are now players fulfilling their own wishes. They've tossed out the advantage that they had by focusing on the player lore rather than on the game master agency. And then finally, they've just fundamentally killed imagination by telling you what things must look like and how the effects must trigger. It's more than I can handle. And so I have now made the full-on adaptation to NycosRPG. If you want to know more about that mechanism, you can click on the end card because that includes the full list of videos on how to play NycosRPG. And the website is, of course, NycosRPG.com for the rules and information on the company, and also NycosRPG.info, which is information on the lore. And yeah, you have to tell me how to do all of that, Strig, when we get done here, after I finish the formal part of the show. So I could have a bot, but I don't know how to use them. So I'm old. So we'll talk about that here in a few seconds. In the meantime, thanks for watching this episode of Making Believe, NycosRPG's Game Master Soapbox and Jonathan Albin, and I will see you again next time. Alrighty, so now you can tell me, Strigley, what is it that I need? What's a bot? What do you mean? Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and end. Let me see. Let me see what I can do here. Oh, yeah, go to the site. There we go. Stream elements. Okay, where would I go to find stream elements? You don't know how? You just do chat and mod stuffs. Okay. Let's see here. Never use stream elements. No, I'm too new. Settings. Must be under settings. Stream elements. Oh, I don't even know how to get to that. What is Nightbot? Where would I? I have to go to another site. I don't know what Mixer is. See, I'm old. Oh, okay. Different provider. That's what it is. Gotcha. Here come the ads. 27 seconds. So would bots be considered to be extensions? Streamer tools. Maybe that's it. Okay, what commercials? Well, Vox, we're going to probably want to coordinate doing some shows together, and Strigley's been really helpful. He operates out of New Zealand, so he's on a very different time zone. But he's now formerly one of us. Strigley started playing last week in one of the games on Sunday. So. I don't know if you did or not. I know that my ads mechanism requires you to watch so many minutes as an affiliate is part of the process. So I can certainly look into alternatives for. I know that if you're a sponsor, you don't get the ads. So if you decide to sponsor the show, then you get no. Yeah, see, as an affiliate, the commercials do have to be placed, and then I have to choose whether I want them in big bursts or interspersed throughout the whole show. And so, rather than have the big burst all at once at the very beginning, I didn't front load. So you get basically almost 20 minutes before the first commercial, and then every 20 minutes thereafter. And generally, it's like a two or three. It's not usually a ton. But if you got 6 all at once, that was kind of anomalous. Yeah, I made an affiliate really quickly. We had a young lady who was one of our players, who was a TikTok star with 500,000 viewers, and that was back when OnlyFans didn't exist yet. And since she was a pretty young thing, she had a lot of Twitch Twitter dance moves and stuff like that that drew a lot of attention. And so she had a lot of viewers, and when he came over to play, she brought a lot of them with her. And so we got up to, yeah, you may have. So she helped to build my membership up. But then we got into a challenge with her then boyfriend. I don't know what the situation is right now, but it messed stuff up. Let's just put it that way. And so then my viewership has dropped and then grown and dropped and grown since then. So we're holding through at about the same number, but I don't know how many people are actively watching. I do know that the viewership has improved over the days since I started doing the Nycos evening news. And so a lot of people want to know what's going on in the world. And so I'm looking forward to doing another one of those tomorrow. Alrighty, well, I think as we're coming up on the hour, and I don't want to put you through another commercial wave after the hour, I'm going to go ahead and end the show for now. If you want, go ahead and hop in the Discord channel. Both of you, I know you have access to it, and we can talk at the water cooler there. All right, otherwise I'll talk to everybody later. This is NycosRPG, Making Believe. Thanks for watching. If you like what you see, make sure you follow the channel. If you don't like what you say, thank you for the time you spent with us, and we'll see you next